At first light, before the heat rises from the ground, a male peacock steps into open space and becomes something almost unreasonable. He lifts a wall of iridescent color behind him, a fan taller than his body, heavy with bronze, green, blue, and hundreds of false eyes. The air trembles with a dry, rattling hiss. Sunlight catches microscopic structures in the feathers and turns them into shifting metal. From a distance, it looks excessive. Up close, it looks impossible. This is a bird that appears to have evolved against common sense, too bright, too loud, too cumbersome, too theatrical. And yet the display persists, generation after generation, refined rather than removed. Today we're diving into why nothing about peacock evolution is normal. Why one of the most famous birds on Earth became a problem for Darwin. A test case for sexual selection. And a living example of how evolution is often driven not by elegance or efficiency, but by competition, perception, and strange biology of desire. Charles Darwin understood immediately that the peacock posed a challenge. Natural selection, in its simplest form, should favor traits that help an animal survive long enough to reproduce. But the peacock's display seems to do the opposite. It is conspicuous, burdensome, and energetically expensive. Darwin admitted his discomfort in a famous line to Asa Gray. The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze on it, makes me sick. What disturbed him was not the bird itself, but what it implied. If beauty this extravagant could evolve, then survival alone could not explain the living world. Darwin's answer was sexual selection traits can spread not because they help an animal endure winter, escape predators, or find food, but because they help it win mates. In peafowl, reproduction does not simply modify survival, it can overwhelm it. Even the anatomy is deceptive. What most people call the peacock's tail is not really the tail at all. The shimmering fan is formed mainly by enormously elongated upper tail coverts, while the true tail feathers sit beneath it and act as a support structure. During courtship, the male raises the actual tail, pushes the train forward, and then vibrates the whole apparatus into a visual and acoustic display. This matters because the peacock is not merely carrying a longer version of a normal body part. He is carrying an evolutionary construction, a specialized signaling machine assembled from modified feathers, structural color, vibration, sound, and posture. In the blue and green peafowl, that train can reach roughly 150 centimeters, transforming a ground bird into a mobile billboard of selection pressures written in light. The old textbook version of the story is clean and satisfying. Females prefer more elaborate males, so males evolve more elaborate trains. There is real evidence behind that idea. Early fieldwork on peafowl suggested that females often favored males with more ornate trains and more eyespots, supporting Darwin's original intuition that female choice helped shape the display. It was an elegant explanation beauty becomes heritable, because somebody is choosing it. In that sense, the peacock is not an evolutionary mistake. He is the product of repeated decisions made by peahens over many generations, each choice nudging the species toward more spectacle. What seems irrational at the level of one bird can become entirely rational at the level of genes competing for future bodies. But the story does not remain clean for long. When researchers followed peafowl over years rather than moments, the signal became messier. A long-term study summarized from work by Takahashi and colleagues found no consistent evidence that peahens preferred males with longer trains, greater symmetry, or simply more. Some predated males even had longer trains than survivors. The conclusion was not that the display means nothing, but that the peacock's ornament is not a simple scoreboard where more is always better. That is one reason peacock evolution feels so abnormal. The most iconic example of sexual selection turns out not to obey the cartoon version of sexual selection. The display matters, but apparently not in the straightforward, linear way humans first imagined. Once scientists began looking at the peahen rather than only at the peacock, the logic shifted again. Miniature eye trackers placed on peahens revealed that females do not watch the display the way human observers do. They do not gaze admiringly at the whole fan. During close courtship, they focus mainly on the lower train, and largely ignore the head, crest, and much of the upper display. When the lower portion is obscured, however, the upper train becomes important as a long-distance attraction signal. In other words, the peacock's fan is not one message. It is layered communication. One part pulls a female in from afar. Another part is inspected at close range. Added to that are behavioral cues, train rattling, and wing shaking that capture and hold attention. The peacock is not showing off one ornament. He is performing a multi-component sensory sequence. That sequence is even more precise than it first appears. Males do not simply open the train wherever they happen to stand. Research cited by Lake Forest College reports that courting peacocks often orient their displays at roughly 45 degrees to the sun. This angle enhances the iridescent eyespots, allowing the feathers to flash more effectively toward the female. It is a subtle behavior, but evolution is built from subtle advantages repeated many times. A bird on open ground is effectively manipulating illumination, using celestial geometry to improve how structural color reaches another bird's retina. The display is not just plumage. It is plumage positioned in time, space, and light. Lake Forest College News. Then there is the sound. A peacock in full display is not silent decoration. High-speed video and biomechanical analysis show that during train rattling, the male stridulates his tail feathers against the erected train at an average frequency of about 25.6. The feather arrays resonate near that same frequency, making the performance mechanically efficient. And at the center of the motion lies one of the display's strangest tricks. While the loose barbs around them shimmer and vibrate, the colorful eye spots remain nearly stationary. The background flickers, the targets hold still. What a female sees is a field of motion surrounding islands of order. Evolution here has not produced a simple ornament, but a visual illusion engineered by feather structure and resonance. The peacock's signaling system extends beyond color and vibration into something even less intuitive: tactical sound and occasional deception. Males perform a behavior called the hoot-display, rushing toward a female while producing a loud hoot associated with attempted copulation. Playback experiments show that these calls can attract other females from a distance. But some males also give these hoots when no female is present and no mating attempt is underway. According to a 2014 study, these deceptive solo hoots make up about a third of hoot calls in some populations, and females are more likely to visit males after hearing them. That means the peacock's courtship is not only extravagant, it can be strategically dishonest. A male may advertise sexual success he has not actually achieved, exploiting the attention of eavesdropping females at the leg. PubMed Smithsonian Magazine. Now the picture becomes stranger still. For decades, biologists assumed that such a spectacular train must impose a severe visibility cost by making males easy targets for predators. That assumption seems obvious to human eyes, but a 2019 study in PLOS ONE tested how peacock eyespots and other colorful feathers appear not to birds, but to mammalian predators with dichromatic vision. The result was surprising. To peafowl, the eyespots show strong color contrast. To mammalian predators, many of those same patches fall below clear color detection thresholds and resemble surrounding vegetation far more than humans would expect. Some of the most dazzling plumage on Earth may function as a vivid signal to other peafowl, while remaining comparatively muted to many predators. That does not mean the train is free. Moving, calling, and displaying in open space still carry risks, and predators use more than color alone. But it does mean that the peacock's apparent absurdity is partly a trick of human perception. We are trichromatic primates, intensely responsive to bright color and contrast. A predator, such as a canid or felid, may inhabit a very different sensory world. The peacock's display, then, is not merely flamboyant. It is tuned to the sensory biases of its intended audience, while partly slipping past the sensory limitations of the wrong one. Evolution has not made a universally conspicuous object. It has made a signal with selective visibility. And even the eye spots themselves may not have a single simple origin. A phylogenomic study of peafowl and their relatives examined the evolution of Ochelithos ornamental eye-like patterns across pheasant-like birds. Peafowl are not alone in bearing them. Peacock pheasants and Argus pheasants also carry ochelli, but their patterns and feather locations differ. The study concludes that the most parsimonious explanation may not be one ancient origin preserved unchanged, but repeated evolutionary gains. Why would eye-like ornaments arise again and again? One possibility is a pre-existing sensory bias. Females may be predisposed to attend to eye-like shapes, so even simple mutations creating such patterns could be favored and elaborated repeatedly. In that case, the peacock's most famous feature is not unique genius, but a recurring evolutionary opportunity. This makes peafowl less like a single bizarre accident, and more like a family of experiments in ornament. The blue peafowl of India and Sri Lanka carries the classic towering train. The green peafowl of Southeast Asia is similarly extravagant, though ecologically distinct. The Congo peacock, by contrast, is smaller, darker, and lacks the enormous train of pavo. Even within the birds we casually group as peacocks, evolution has not followed one template. Ornament expands, contracts, and reappears in different forms depending on habitat, ancestry, and sexual dynamics. There is no inevitable march toward maximum showiness. There are only shifting trade-offs, historical constraints, and repeated negotiations between what survives and what gets chosen. The deeper significance of the peacock is that it exposes a bias in human thinking. We like to imagine evolution as an engineer, relentlessly optimizing bodies for practical tasks. But sexual selection is not an engineer. It behaves more like a market driven by attention, preference, rivalry, and signal value. That is why the same broader logic can help explain not just peacock trains, but deer antlers, beetle horns, and other exaggerated ornaments that seem to burden the animals carrying them. A mathematical model from Northwestern, building on Zahavi's handicap principle, suggests that the tension between natural selection and sexual selection can produce populations split between flashy, high-cost ornaments and more subdued, low-cost forms. The peacock is not outside evolution. It reveals one of evolution's least intuitive rules: costly display can itself be the point. Seen this way, the peacock becomes a living contradiction, only because human intuition is poor at thinking in reproductive terms. We ask, how can a trait this cumbersome persist? Evolution asks a different question: does it help leave descendants? If the answer is yes often enough, then the cost can be tolerated, manipulated, or redirected. A structure can become burdensome yet informative, dangerous yet effective, excessive yet stable. The train survives not because it is efficient in the way wings or kidneys are efficient, but because it turns the male body into evidence of condition, timing, coordination, access to display space, and perhaps social reputation among observing females. And still, after all the measurements and models, the center of the story remains unresolved. We know that peahens do not inspect the train the way humans do. We know they attend to different regions at different distances. We know light angle matters, mechanical resonance matters, calls matter, and sometimes deception works. We know predators may not see what we see. We know eyespots may have arisen repeatedly, perhaps because the minds of birds were already biased to notice them. But we do not yet possess a single, complete explanation for what any given female actually values in the final instant before choice. Is she judging symmetry, movement, vigor, persistence, experience, social information, or some sensory integration humans have barely begun to reconstruct? That is why the peacock still feels unsettling in the best scientific sense, not because it breaks evolution, but because it reveals how much of evolution happens in realms we struggle to see: private perceptual worlds, fleeting decisions, ancient biases, and trade-offs measured not in elegance but in offspring. The bird standing in the sun, vibrating a fan of false eyes, is not a symbol of simple beauty. It is a record of accumulated choices, some honest, some deceptive, some ancient, some contingent, written into feather after feather. And beyond the visible display lies the part we still do not fully understand: why one nervous system, in one brief moment, decides that this impossible creature is worth choosing, and by choosing, keeps the impossible alive.